Lately, there's been a lot of hullabaloo about what Lovelace's top performance is likely to hit over Ampere, with some leakers quoting some truly insane numbers. But here's the thing, so many of these leakers are saying insane numbers that it got me thinking, am I crazy? I have basically been holding steadfast to my Lovelace estimates from about a year ago, that the initial estimate for top Lovelace Performance was a flagship that used between 400 to 450 watts and brought a bigger performance increase than Ampere, but also used more energy. Now, to be fair, I recently did confirm that Nvidia is overclocking Lovelace out of the box by, well, a lot. No, not to 900 watts, but to 600 watts for the RTX 4090, and that this thing would likely bring 80 to 110% more performance than Ampere. And so, yeah, that's a big increase. But for some people, it sounds like they think that's a low ball. And I honestly can't believe that me saying Nvidia is going to double performance gen over gen is considered the low ball. And I thought it would be good to take a step back and look at previous node shrinks and the architectures and their performance increases they brought on those new nodes for the past few generations to see if I'm crazy, to see if there is a correlation, to see how much wiggle room there is for these companies to pull a rabbit out of a hat, and how much of it is just literally dictated by TSMC's publicly stated performance increases every generation. And so, well, actually, in doing so, I noticed some things about 4nm nodes at TSMC that were a bit overlooked up until now, I think, and are very exciting. And I can't wait to go through it and tell you guys and really just have us all sit here together and have a reality check at once without talking to any sources. No sources, no little whispers needed. This is what TSMC is possible to do on their node. And before I get to it, I want to be very clear, though. Don't get married to a decimal point to exact percentage points stated by TSMC, because every new architecture on a new node chooses between the maximum density increase, maximum performance increase, and maximum power consumption reductions. You know, they can't get the maximum density, performance, and power consumption reductions at the same time. It's a combination of all three, depending on what AMD, Nvidia, or hopefully soon Intel decides is the best combination for a competitive product line. But I think that what you're going to see is what TSMC says out loud is definitely within the ballpark of the point I'm trying to make here. And so, yeah, this is going to be fun. I want to prove, not from sources, but from publicly available information, what's possible for Lovelace to bring in performance increases over Ampere. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com. Now that I've got my compact Alder Lake benchmarking system done, I'm free to test a lot of graphics cards in both Windows 10 and Windows 11, and I always get those keys from CDKeyOffer.com. That's because it's a reliable, long-term sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead that gets you reasonable prices on legitimate keys for these types of products. But it's really not all that they offer. They also can give you keys for Microsoft Office, keys for PlayStation codes, and even some of the latest PC releases like Elden Ring, and they even carry gaming peripherals in chairs now. Whatever you need, CDKey Offer probably has you covered, and they're always running sales, but make sure you use the best code possible, and that's the ones provided for the Moore's Law is Dead fans. Moore's Law is Dead fans get the biggest discount, and if you go to the link on screen or in the description, you can use code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off Microsoft products and Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Using these codes really does help Moore's Law is Dead, and it helps you pay reasonable prices for games that you want and keys that, frankly, you just have to use half of the time. So, again, use the link in the description, use Broken Silicon, use Die Shrink depending on the products you're getting, and pay reasonable prices for keys today at CDKeyOffer.com. All right, now for today, I have selected a couple of architecture transitions based on when a company went from what was maximized on a previous node to the first generation on a new node. And the first analysis I'm going to do is TSMC 28 nanometer to TSMC 16 nanometer, or Maxwell to Pascal. Now, going from 28 to 20 nanometer, according to TSMC, allows for either a 15% better performance increase or a 33% reduction in power. And note, Pascal was not on 20 nanometer. They actually had the benefits of going to another node. And based on TSMC's own numbers, going from 20 nanometer to 16 nanometer allows for another 50% performance increase or 60% less power. And obviously you can see 16 nanometer from 20 is doing most of the work here in terms of going 2 node shrinks down from Maxwell to Pascal. But if we multiply those together, we can see it's 1.15 times 1.5, or a 72.5% performance increase in total, going from 28 to 16 nanometer. Or if they maximize for only power at the same die size, they could get to only 26.8% the power of a 28 nanometer product if that's all they did. But of course they didn't. They did a combination of both. So now let's look at the actual comparisons between a couple of dies here from these generations. So again, remember, plus 72.5% power or a reduction down to 26.8% the power of a 28 nanometer product if you're going to maximize for either at the exact same die size. And GTX 980 to GTX 1080. The 1080 brought 51% performance over the 980, and the 1080 had a 9% higher TDP, though. To get there, it also had a 22% smaller die size, though. So, yeah, you can see, based on these estimates, that die for die, they mostly went for performance, 51% more performance, and it even used more power. But the die was actually smaller than the 980, meaning that it probably cost about the same to make as the 980, considering how cheap memory was back then, even going from 4 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes. Man, back then, actually, RAM was like $5 to $7 a gigabyte. If only we still had RAM that cheap. Anyways, though, let us move on to Titan Maxwell to Titan XP, and actually more impressive die shrink. Titan XP, now this is the fully enabled Pascal Titan. Remember, the first Titan they launched wasn't even the full die. You know, if you look here, 57% according to Tech Power Up for the Titan X Maxwell to 100. So 100 divided by 57, that's a 75% performance increase, right? And it was done actually at the same TDP, although I believe the Titan XP, remember, TDP isn't actually power consumption. I believe the Titan XP actually used a little more energy than Titan Maxwell, but nonetheless, that's really impressive. And it is, well, the performance increase TSMC basically said. Maybe a little more, but Titan XP also had a 22% smaller die size than Titan Maxwell there. But at the end of the day, I think you can see, you can see what's going on here. You know, when it wasn't done perfectly, like with the 1080, they made a slightly smaller die that brought 50% more performance and used a little more energy. So that's well within TSMC's stated numbers. But when they hit a home run with this gen over gen increase, they got to something that at the same power brought the performance increase TSMC said it would, and it even shrunk the die size a little bit. That is going above and beyond. Pascal was a killer generation. I think we can all agree on that. But again, it's not really wildly outside of what TSMC said was possible. And there were some huge logic gains in terms of density going down 2 of those nodes to 16 nanometer from 28. But let us move on now, everybody. All right, so here now we're going to look at TSMC 16 nanometer to Samsung 8 nanometer with an asterisk, or Pascal to Ampere with an asterisk. Now, the asterisk is there because this is comparing shrinks between different foundries. And so it's very hard to establish an exact number because they don't compare their own nodes to their competitors' nodes. They compare their nodes to their own previous gen nodes. But I think you'll see that what I quote, I think, is more than fair to Nvidia. So at least going from 16 nanometer to 10 nanometer at TSMC allows for 15% better performance or a 35% reduction in power and double the logic density, which is really impressive. 10 nanometer was not a slouch, but it just wasn't used for any generations of flagship graphics cards at TSMC. Now, going from TSMC 10 nanometer to Samsung 8 nanometer, well, that's a bit complicated. At the very least, TSMC 7 nanometer is 20% faster or 40% lower power than TSMC's own 16 nanometer. And as far as I can gather by looking at various sources, and I haven't shown snapshots from all of them, but please take a look at the links in the description. Samsung's 10 nanometer is more or less stated as being less dense than TSMC 10 nanometer, although some links say they're about the same, to be honest. But the performance is similar to TSMC's 10 nanometer based on publicly available information I can find. So in other words, I think we can say that Samsung's 10 nanometer is mostly comparable to TSMC's 10 nanometer, and Samsung's 8 nanometer isn't their 10 nanometer. It is the third generation of 10 nanometer. And basically, if you look at the links in the description, brings you TSMC's 7 nanometer level density, but generally speaking, and again, it's murky, but 10 to 15% lower frequency and a 15 to 25% power disadvantage. But again, it's certainly up for debate. So look, I understand the math below is going to be debatable, but I think it's more than fair and within the ballpark of what reality is. And that means that I think going from 16 to 10 nanometer at TSMC, that is the 1.15 and then times 1.1. So instead of assuming that Samsung's 8 nanometer brings them 20% faster or 40% lower power, I'm saying they get a 10% boost in performance instead of 20 going to their own 8 nanometer node, which is in line with what Samsung basically reports. And then in power consumption reduction, I'd say 10% lower power as well, which is what Samsung says. So yeah, they're like a 10 to 30% disadvantage depending on how you look at it compared to TSMC 7 nanometer. But I would say that's not really even the difference between 16 and 10 nanometer. They're maybe a little, they're about half a node behind TSMC 7 nanometer. And so if we then look at what you should expect from performance going from Pascal to Ampere based on node alone, you would say, okay, you should expect at the same die size, a 26.5% increase in performance, or if you only optimize for power, you can reduce power consumption by about 40%. Samsung's power consumption is built for smartphones more so than TSMC, I think, or at least TSMC is better at getting power consumption reductions out of high performance things than Samsung is, if you want to be negative towards Samsung. And well, if we compare the 1070 Ti to the RTX 3060. And the reason I'm comparing these cards is because their die sizes are pretty close. That's what I'm trying to find, is dies that are similar in size, not just the same tier. The 3060 brought a 24% performance increase over the 1070 Ti at a slightly smaller die size while using a little less power. But you can see that, right? 24% performance increase, not 26.5%, but it used, a little less than 6% less power and brought a 12% reduction in die size. So again, we're kind of seeing the performance increase you get die to die tends to pretty much line up, and Titan XP to RTX 3070 Ti, a 471 millimeter square die to a almost 400 millimeter square die. The 3070 Ti brought 36% more performance. So, okay, that's more than what TSMC said you'd be able to get. But it also did so with a 16% higher TDP, although the die was a little smaller. So again, are you guys seeing what I'm saying here? Like, if you multiply all of the benefits together, it's never more than the benefits of combining power and performance. And so then we move on to what you can expect out of Nvidia Lovelace, going from Samsung 8 nanometer to TSMC 4 nanometer. And look, TSMC 5 nanometer offers a 20% better performance or 40% lower power than TSMC's own 7 nanometer. And so let's just assume that the 7 nanometer node is 15% better at basically everything than Samsung. It's really not. Its density isn't much better at all. Its performance increase is probably about 10%, but its power consumption reduction is more. I think it's more than fair to just assume 15% across the board here. And well, then we start talking about TSMC 4 nanometer, and oof, is Lovelace using standard N4, which is supposed to come out by the end of this year, N4P, which is supposedly not coming out until like December or the beginning of next year, or N4X, a node that I think everyone's forgotten, a node of 4 nanometer that's tailored to bringing high performance at high voltages. Well, if you ask me, I think NVIDIA's custom 4 nanometer node is a combination of things from N4P and N4X, because look how much energy Lovelace uses. And as luck would have it, I was recently tipped off by a source what it means to use a custom node, with AMD typically trying to bring down the voltage used at higher frequencies, which is why RDNA 2 is so efficient, and NVIDIA likely adjusting the custom node to get higher performance with more voltage, which it's interesting to see N4X mentioned here as well. And to note that NVIDIA's approach is almost the opposite of AMD. I am just going to give NVIDIA the best case scenario. I'm going to assume they somehow have a 2023 or 2024 node this year, which will bring 15% better performance and 22% lower power than TSMC's 5nm. And so we get 1.2, that's TSMC 5 to 7 nanometer. And then we also assume that we got to give them a 15% boost because technically they were on Samsung 8 nanometer. They weren't on TSMC 7 nanometer. They were on an inferior node. They also just give them a 15% boost, assuming somehow Nvidia just has N4X early. And we get to 58.7% more performance than Samsung 8 nanometer. And for power reduction, again, 0.6 from TSMC's 7 to 5 nanometer, a 15% boost simply because we know Samsung's 8 nanometer is inferior to TSMC's 7. And then we just, again, do that 22% power reduction. All right. You see what's happening here? This performance increase and power reduction is certainly a bigger jump than 16 to 8 nanometer, meaning, like I've been saying, you should expect Lovelace to be a bigger deal than Ampere, but also it's much smaller than the increase they got from 28 nanometer to 16 nanometer. And so, people, where do the insane numbers come from? Previous generations did not buck the laws of physics. How is Nvidia bucking the laws of physics now? Do they have a 1,000 millimeter square die? As far as I can see based on leaks out there, no, it's similar die size to Ampere. Are they using HBM4? I don't think so. At most GDDR7 that I leaked, and no one else is even talking about that. So these people that say it's only using GDDR6X, how are you getting to these numbers? Based on my math, and I think I was very generous to Nvidia, a 450-watt Lovelace card should be about 59% higher performance than a 450-watt Ampere card if they had the same die size, which pretty closely lines up with my initial targets for Lovelace's performance. I did not do this, last year. This is hilarious to me how it's lining up with what I was told. And remember that 450 watts is already very high power consumption for a product. To those people that are about to spam the comments by saying, but it's the N4X node. It's meant to bring higher performance at higher voltages and power. 450 watts is already, well, if it wasn't for the 3090 Ti, unprecedented. That is already optimizing for high power at 450 watts. And pushing the performance from the original 450 watt target for the RTX 4090 by 33% to 600 watts will not linearly increase performance by 33%. That's never how overclocking works. It is never that generous to performance increases for increased power. And so even if it was a linear increase, though, 59%, like I've said, we should expect based on my previous math, and we multiply that by a 33% increase in performance somehow directly received from a 33% increase in power, we still get to only a 111.5% performance increase over Ampere, which is hilariously not far off from what my upper estimates were from talking to my sources that were right about the last generation. So, look, guys, these are possible numbers, but these are the upper estimates, assuming a just perfectly designed architecture that hits it out of the park. And we must also then remember from Samsung 8 nanometer to TSMC N4X-ish, if you will, is a smaller increase than going from TSMC 28 nanometer to TSMC 16. Pascal, and I put this in quotes because it was a legendary generation, only brought a 50 to 75% performance increase over Maxwell, while increasing power a little bit, but it wasn't overclocked to the moon. With massive overclocking, would Pascal have tripled performance? No. It probably would have doubled performance, which is what I'm roughly expecting out of Lovelace. And so based on public information in recent Silicon history, I believe Lovelace would require more than just insane overclocking and the best node on the market, which they're probably going to have, to reach above 2.5x performance increase over Ampere. Look, I can believe that they're going to double performance gen over gen with the power consumption numbers I've been told, and maybe do a little better than double. But anything more, anything above 2.5x, I believe would require a notable die size increase like 800 millimeters squared and at least GDDR7 to get there. So unless I see someone confirm not only the fastest GDDR7 is coming sooner than people think, but that it would also have a bigger die size than everyone else is communicating up until now. And I want to be clear about this. AMD isn't magic either. They are doubling performance with RDNA 3 over RDNA 2 without requiring insane power usage by using multiple dies and advanced packaging. This is a lower cost alternative to what Nvidia is being forced to do to compete, and AMD has been working for years since Zen 1 to make this work on GPUs. This is the only reason AMD is managing to do this. The equivalent die size of putting multiple chips together is bigger than Lovelace's die. That is how they are getting to that performance level without using 600 watts. So in conclusion, based on publicly available information, no sources, no little whispers, even if this is an RDNA 2 or Maxwell-like architecture that's a perfect design and scaling with die size on a new node, a home run, anything above a 110% increase over Ampere is going to be shocking to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I cannot find the evidence that this is even possible in publicly available information. The publicly available information has been pretty damn accurate for every previous performance increase that we've seen, even though I didn't show it because it wasn't as easy to directly compare. I mean, think about Pascal to Turing. How did Nvidia bring, what is it, like 30 to 40% more performance over Pascal on effectively the same node? TSMC's 12 nanometer is effectively just the same node as 16 nanometer. Well, it's obvious. They went from a 471 millimeter squared die to a, like a 700 and something, I think 745 maybe, or millimeter squared die. So yeah, they got there by increasing the die size about the same amount as they increased performance. Same with RDNA 2. Navi 21 has a die size that's a little over double the die size of the 5700 XT. And what did they get? A little over double the performance. This isn't always true. Sometimes architectures fall short. Sometimes architectures are perfectly designed, but they're never that far off from these estimates because these companies know what they're doing. And I want to be clear that I'm also accounting for the fact that Nvidia is probably going to increase ray tracing performance a lot more than the rasterization increase. So I'm not lowballing anything here. I'm saying that according to previous precedents, Nvidia is going to achieve this level of rasterization, but there's still room for other little architecture bonuses on top. Anything above the estimates I showed today is just going to be momentous and something that, as far as I've seen, has never been done in recent silicon history. So yeah, this analysis has made me more steadfast in my estimates. I see no reason to deviate from what I've communicated in Lovelace's performance. Although I will say this, there have been people, especially early on when I started talking about Lovelace last year, that didn't believe the numbers I was saying I was overhyping things. But I think people need to go back and watch my big Navi leak where I said RDNA 2 was likely to beat the 3080 a little bit, but unlikely to overall beat the 3090. Last generation, guys, I wasn't the one saying RDNA 2 was going to be 2.5x or Ampere was going to be like some 80% performance increase. I believe for Ampere, I even said something like 50 to 60 something percent performance, which it roughly hit. I feel been pretty reasonable. And so if you don't believe these numbers though, the math is there. The math is not there to triple performance, but if you're doubting that Lovelace will bring a bigger performance increase than Ampere did, the math is there. The node increases are there to support this happening. So stop doubting that Lovelace is below a 60% increase over Ampere, because it's certainly bigger than that. And actually, continuing this topic of performance increases with new nodes, a thing I want to close on is where Nvidia goes next. Whether it's called Blackwell or whatever they name the architecture after Lovelace, it's almost certainly going to use TSMC 3 nanometer. That is the node that will be ready at the end of not this year, but next year. Hopefully, if it's not delayed. I'm hearing it has issues, meaning that that's pretty much all they got if they want to launch something new by early 2024. And I assume Nvidia is going to want to launch something on 3 nanometer by early 2024, because I am told RDNA 4 will be out by the first half of 2024. And so you might say, whatever, Nvidia has a new node to compete with RDNA 4 early 2024. And I would say, yes, but AMD has chiplets, and from what I've heard, RDNA 4 really runs with the idea even more than RDNA 3 does to not deliver a doubling of RDNA 3 performance, but bring a pretty big increase again, probably over 50%. Nvidia going from, well, a 5 nanometer class node, really an advanced 4 nanometer node to 3 nanometer, even if it goes to 2 nanometer, you're looking at a 15% faster node or a 30% lower power consuming node that admittedly has an impressive 1.7 times logic shrink, but that is way far away from the benefits they're getting moving from Samsung 8 nanometer to Samsung 4 nanometer. And I think it's already hard for them to compete with AMD's chiplet approach. So what are they going to do? And AMD can just use chiplets to bring a massive increase again, and they're limited to 15 to 30% more performance? Well, I think Blackwell, or whatever Nvidia calls their next generation after Lovelace, is going to be forced to be an 800 millimeter square die, some kind of Turing situation where they bring, I don't know, like 20 to 30% more die size on about a 20 to 30% better node and try to give you 50 to 60% more performance. But again, this is more and more of an uphill battle against AMD. This is going to have to, again, probably use 600 watts, while RDNA 4 gets power consumption reductions possibly. Unless NVIDIA figures out chiplets and fabric tech as good as AMD, or heck, hopefully fabric tech even as good as Intel, I really think it's going to be a rough late 2023 for NVIDIA if the end of this year isn't already rough against RDNA 3. AMD has been working very hard to get their fabric and chiplet problem fixed for graphics cards. And this problem is now fixed with RDNA 3 based on what I know. This problem isn't going away. It's only going to get worse for NVIDIA. And NVIDIA then needs to figure out GPU chiplets by Blackwell, or I just do not see how they're going to compete, especially when you consider, I think it's hard for them to compete right now with Lovelace against RDNA 3. But those types of topics really should be saved for a future video. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law's Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you don't miss those upcoming analysis and leak videos. I've actually got a very exciting CPU leak video that is on a subject that might surprise you guys coming up probably within a week, maybe even within a few days. So look out for that. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And then, of course, subscribe to Broken Silicon, your podcast app of choice. Give us a review. Support the sponsors. Supporting the sponsors with the offer codes really helps the channel. And as always, the best way to help Moore's Law's Dead is to just support us on Patreon, to pay me, Gerard, Dan, and now our rendering person directly. We're a team. This is how we put food on the table, and we can't do this without direct support. So all of that's there for you, and you get exclusive ad-free content every week when you do that. But at the end of the day, by now, all I have left to say is thank you for watching.